So welcome to Contributors Meeting, 14th of March. Today, I want to focus on DX, a nice buzzword. It's a little bit like user experience, developer experience, because we're focusing on a platform for developers, framework for them to build functions. All of the things I'm going to show you about making the developer experience even better. And many of you have been involved in that. So the agenda for today, we might not get through all of this, is a quick roundtable, which we'll do now, and have a catch up. We'll introduce anybody who's new as well. What have you been working on? What are you working on next? Is there any great ideas you've got? Have a quick recap of the trip to Slovakia, which was last week. Talk about readiness in the UI, what that looks like, and what it's going to mean. And then there's an opportunity to go into a bit of a deeper dive on the watchdog that I know a few people have asked about around logging and this idea about HTTP or forking. And then I wanted to mention or touch on some load testing we've been doing and some improvements around scale. So let's do a quick roundtable. I'll kick it off. So I'm going to be talking about this anyway, but Wednesday to Sunday, I was in Slovakia with Stefan Prodan, and we were running a workshop on the Sunday. You've probably all heard about it a few times already. It's using Python as the main language, and it shows you how to chain functions together and do all sorts of things. And I built it out with some of you guys and with Ivana, and it's something that I'm hoping you'll be able to run in your communities or at groups and events. And it's something that I'm going to make a lot of use of as well. I was already chatting to local meetup group in Peterborough about going and running the Open Fast workshop on a Saturday morning, getting some of the local developers together. The other stuff I've been doing is cutting some releases around developer experience that I'll go into in a minute. So that's from me. Burton, you're the next on the Zoom list. Do you want to give an update?
Sure. Well, Burton Rutan, I've been contributor since October. Lately, I've been working on the new C# HTTP template to take advantage of the new watchdog. Also been working on a project of my own that is an API around a SQL database to make querying databases from serverless functions easier. Working through the security and things like that for now, and then helping with the issues and Slack and all that.
Thanks for the help on GitHub. It's making a big difference to the amount of time I'm having to go in there and explain things. So really appreciate it.
Glad to help.
Please keep it up if you can. Charlie?
Hi, I'm Charlie. Came to the Open Fast project a couple months ago, working on building a transcoder using serverless. Got a few things I need to lift into making it fully serverless, but my schedule's freed up enough now, so that should be coming here in the very near future. I'm looking to start contributing to the core project.
I've just noticed nobody's taking the notes, so I'm going to quickly do that while Eric, if you want to give us your update.
Hi, so my name's Eric. I've been on the project since like September. This past 2 weeks, I've been looking at Helm charts, update for Kafka, and I've also been looking at the ARM Helm chart or ARM YAML templates. So I got a PR out for that. But I'm on call right now at work, so I'm going to be dropping off the call a little early. But good to see everybody.
Yeah, thanks for that, Eric. Had a bit of a look at how we can manage events. Eric and I were looking at that together. and we've got some ideas of how we can do it in sort of a generic way, so that whatever the event source is, RabbitMQ, Kafka, AWS, we could provide an easy pattern for people to use so that they can start consuming those events in a OpenFaaS-like way. Ivana?
Hi, I'm Ivana. I'm pretty new in the project since maybe 3 or 4 weeks. What I've done currently was investigating the project, preparing collabs, doing some functions for IssueBot, and sending tweets to Slack channels and filtering them. So didn't throw out any core things yet.
Yeah, so Ivana is the second person to work on OpenFaaS full-time, along with me, and she's based out of Bulgaria. Some of the other stuff you've been doing is helping out with issues, commenting on stuff like what Burton's doing. Again, it's it's invaluable giving that feedback to the community and helping them out. So thank you for that. Some of the things we're going to look at next. We're going to be starting to look at the docs PR, breaking out some small parts of that to see if we can run it with something called Netlify that will package up your site into a HTTPS site. I think it does automatic TLS. I want to just see what the experience is like and then start moving over the documentation gradually so that we don't have this problem of it getting out of sync. We're actually moving things across piecemeal or not trying to bite off too much in one chunk. But if anyone wants to input into that, please feel free. There's activities that are open on GitHub. Next person, John Calloway, our MVP.
Yeah, hi, relatively new, just been playing around with OpenFaaS for a little while, primarily with a Raspberry Pi cluster. So looking to get involved and maybe put together some more sample projects or maybe get something into the store. So just looking for a good suggestion for anything that I could do for like a .NET Core function to get out there.
Yeah, didn't you say you have some events coming up soon as well?
Yeah, this weekend I'll be in Orlando giving a presentation with .NET Core in Docker and OpenFaaS on the 6 Pi cluster, and I'll be giving that talk 3 or 4 times over the next month in Orlando, in Louisville, Kentucky, St. Petersburg, Florida, and one more submission is still outstanding for Nashville, Tennessee.
Great. That sounds like you've done really well getting all of those talks accepted. If you think we can help you in any way of promoting them, then please just get in touch. If you've got links for the different events and the dates, we can put them into our community file. It's quite a long file, but it's now got a 2018 section that's quite short. So if you just fill that in and then bug me and I'll try and tweet from the main account as well.
Okay, will do. Thank you.
No problem. Richard Gee, could you chat to us a little bit?
Richard Gee, based in the UK. I've been around for probably about 12 months now. More recently, submitted a function to the store that was multi-architecture. So one image that covers both Raspberry Pi and x86, and even more recently than that, I've been working on removing the network attribute from the store JSON files for ARM and x86 after some work that Alex did earlier this week.
Yeah, that's worth mentioning just quickly now. The store, when you deploy a function on Swarm, expects the network to be the default one, which is func_functions. made a small change after I figured out it was possible to derive the network by putting a label on it. And now if you leave an empty network when you deploy on Swarm, it just figures out the right one, which is probably functions, or it could be whatever it is, depending on where you've deployed OpenVAS. So that's one of the big improvements for the developer experience. And now we want to update the store so that it's not hard-coded anymore. And that means if you deploy to a different stack name, it'll work just the same. If you're on Kubernetes, it's a no harm change. I think we've also got something for Derek that we need to look at again, and we need to merge soon.
Yeah, that's right. Just a little bit tidied up that you asked for off the back of the last PR, and adding in edit title as well as set title as an alias.
That's good. And we've seen a return of John McCabe over in Ireland there.
Yeah, I've drifted in and out in sort of recent months. Kind of drifted back, but sort of a lot less bandwidth than I had before, because I'm sort of kind of heading up a new product and work. But recently, I've been looking at a new sort of feature for Derek to just sort of check to make sure that people are kind of actually sort of providing all of the correct headers. So I have it written, but I haven't got it tested. So I've been kind of trying to get some time to sort of actually run a few tests on that. So hopefully get some time this week or over the bank holiday weekend, because we've St. Patrick's Day on Monday, so we get our St. Patrick's Day the weekend, so we get a day off. So I have a bit of time.
Great. And there's been a few smaller things you've done, right?
Quite possibly.
Okay, we'll come back to that. Thank you, John. I see Stefan has joined. Stefan, we're just going around giving a quick update, really.
Yeah, so I've been finally managed to get some time and port all the code from Fastnetis to the new CRD controller. And just a couple of minutes, I did my last pull request. It's a port of every function spec that we now have in the stack file. Has been ported to custom resource for Kubernetes, and will function with kubectl or push a function with our FastCLI, and it will behave in the exact same way. And I only tested it on GKE, so I will need some help with the ARM version if someone wants to do that.
Yeah, I think it's probably a very technical task. It'd be good if you could give it some initial testing on Scaleway. And then maybe once we get it to a certain stage, we can start looking at it on other people's clusters as well.
Yeah, so the testing on the CRD will be kind of time consuming, because we have to test every API call.
Yeah,
auto scaling, everything, basically everything. Last time I did that, it took me half a day. And it was only on GKE, not Scaleway, not ARM, not anything else.
Yeah, so it does need some exploratory testing, but it also just needs basic testing as well. Does it even work? Can you even build it? Will it run? Is there a weird Kubernetes component that isn't ready for ARM? All of that kind of stuff needs doing up front, ideally by the subject expert.
Yeah,
and then once we got kind of a level of confidence, maybe we can recruit people into that.
Yeah, I will build it and run it on Scaleway.
Yeah. Next time we'll go the opposite order, because Vivek, you've ended up being at the bottom of the list. Do you want to give an update? We spoke to each other, I think last week, wasn't it, or the week before?
Yeah, it was week before. 2 weeks before. So, I have been part of this project since October last year, and I have mostly contributed to CLI and template, and currently I am working on template. And I have also added few functions to store and few contributions to Gateway and Watchdog to update the read and write time configuration to support the Go duration.
Can you tell us what you're doing with the templates?
So right now I'm working on updating the Python templates to use a return instead of print in all those template functions.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
And I was testing that Python ARM function on a scale base, so I was testing something I posted in continuous channel.
Great. Thank you. Thanks for staying up late to speak to us. I'll share a little bit more with you guys now about last week. I don't think I missed anyone. If I have, just shout. So we're going to talk about the PyCon update. Stefan very kindly came out to help me lead the first OpenFAS workshop. And this was a culmination of the work from the community. I think there were 6 different contributors to the code, and other people contributed to it through different amounts of testing. I was really hoping to have a completely packed out room, but ended up being on a Sunday afternoon, and we still got around 15 to 20 people though, and most of them either had Linux or Mac. Only one person had Windows, which is pretty good when you're doing something with Docker. And then once we figured out the projector, we both gave a bit of an introduction. Here's Stefan. And people got on with the content. Here's some of the folks that were there towards the end, and got some good questions. We opened a Slack channel. You can actually see that over on this PyCon SK. Has got some of the feedback that was sent during the workshop. It's quite a good way of talking to each other. One of the main bits of feedback was they like Python 3 and they really don't want anything to do with Python 2. So I think in our messaging, we should focus on Python 3 being what we're targeting. One of the guys completed the whole workshop in about an hour and a half, so quick that I thought he skipped it, but he didn't, and he really enjoyed that. And then some of the others spent around 2.5, 3 hours, and they came to the end of the content. So we might need some help with getting together a few extra bits, just in case we have people that really finish quick. And then here's me and Stefan in our matching shirts just before the main keynote. So we've got a nice surprise, got asked to do the opening keynote of the conference, and we talked about OpenFAS, some of the work that's been happening at Contiamo and with Anisha too. So there'll be a recording coming out soon. Also had a chance to speak at the Docker meetup on the Thursday about Derek. So if you're thinking about submitting a talk and you want to do one on Derek, there's some slides. I know Eric had mentioned this to me. There's also a recording that I sent out on this meeting invite. So it was a great trip. One of the things that I've been demoing is UI readiness. And I think people have been kind of expecting this to be there from the beginning, or really asking for it. And the idea here is that when you go onto a function and you invoke it, it's very hard at the moment to know whether it's ready. Well, actually, I've changed something in the API that lets us know if a function is ready. And this is great when you've got a really big image, like one of the ones like Tesseract, which is an OCR-based image. It's very big. Is this one that you did, Vivek?
Yes.
Yeah, so let's deploy that, and it's a few hundred megabytes at least. And if I can find it quick enough, you see invoke is gray, status not ready. Now this is far better than the button being available and clicking on it and not knowing what's going on. It's just come up, which means it is actually now available in the cluster. And the way we do that is we've got a bit of code in the API. system function. And if you put the name of a function, it gives you JSON, and it tells you now the available replicas as well as the replicas that we want. And to start off with, this is 0. And then as you get more and more ready, it becomes whatever your min count was. Any questions on this?
Yeah, real quick, Alex. I believe there was discussion over this not working as well in Kubernetes. Is that true, or am I just making that up?
So basically, this is now available for Docker Swarm and for Kubernetes. And the way it's being done is at the individual function level, which means that whatever the cost of querying it is still pretty quick, and it's not necessarily going to impact the whole system. Kubernetes gives you this almost for free. With Docker Swarm, it's not quite as free. So the way we've implemented it is by making you have to ask for a specific function in order to be able to get that data. So when you get the whole function list, like system functions, it's not going to be, it was not going to be populated. It probably is populated because I'm on Kubernetes, but if it was in Swarm, we don't do that as an optimization. Does that answer the question?
Yes, I guess I mixed it up. It was difficult in Swarm, but easy in Kubernetes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's right. And this might allow us to do other things as well, like scaling to 0. And then when we get a call come in for a function, scaling it to 1 at that point in time. I think that will be really exciting for a lot of people with big projects. If you want to know more, there are issues, there are pull requests on GitHub. Ken helped me a little bit with the UI, with testing it. Basically what happens is there's the regular call that gets the list of functions, and there's one more call that happens over and over again every 2 or 3 seconds, and that's asking to know whether the function selected in the UI is ready. So you can do it programmatically as well. If I can get the network tab open, I can show you the traffic that you'll see now. We go to inspect, and we should see the regular system functions call coming in. But then if we click on a specific one like colorize, we'll see it's gray until we get the first call through. May not be driving the UI right here, but basically you'll get another call on the timer coming through. And that's what's going to show you whether your function is up or not. There we go. So these colorized ones are going to the route that I just showed you from the UI. So if you deploy a big image, you know exactly when to click the button. When you're doing your demo, you don't have to feel nervous or embarrassed if it's not going to work. You know if that button is up, it's good to go. Right. This is available in the gateway 0.7.5. The current master is pointing at 0.7.3. So I'm holding back a little bit to do some more testing. When we're happy with it, we'll change the YAML files so that they just use this one instead. So that's the UI readiness. The watchdog I wanted to mention because there was a question we had from Lucas, and what he was saying was when you call a function and you have an error where you want to log something, where does it go? Well, at the moment that ends up being in the function response. So if we do a new function here, try Python. Now, normally whatever we write or return out of this function, like that, will come out as the response when we call it. But there's something that is worth thinking about, is that on a lot of languages, when you do a log, it actually writes to standard error. So we go sys.standard standard error.write. Just put something in here like I got to this point in the program. We do it again on 2. So this is like your debug log in Node.js, for instance. Right now, what you will see is that this will appear in your function response. You'll get 3 lines, and it might not be what you were expecting. Has anybody run into this before? Cheers, Eric.
Yeah.
Someone says yeah, Burton. You've run into it before?
Yes, especially debugging Node, things like that with bunch console log.
So if we invoke this, we actually see all 3 print statements have come out into the logs. And sometimes this is really useful. For instance, if I was to try and import a library here that didn't exist, like a lot of the time I give the example of using requests library, import requests. Well, if we build and deploy this, and it's pretty slow because I'm streaming my screen on Zoom, but if we do this and maybe even check the UI about that. So it's ready. We get this error now. And it's really helpful because if you see this and you've worked with OpenFAS a bit, you think, oh, maybe I didn't have that module where I needed it. You can add it to your requirements text and get past the error. Now, if we only ever gave you the standard output, all you would have seen is exit status 1 and nothing else, which, as you might agree, would be pretty useless, and at which point you'd have to turn on logging on the function, write debug, deploy it again, invoke it, and look at the logs. So that's the reason why we combine the error and the normal logs together. But there is a way of separating it with the new watchdog. The new watchdog that we're working on is still in incubation. It needs more testing, but it will separate the standard error, any logs you write, to the container. And that's done by default. And then the standard out goes where you would think it would go. So in this example, you would just see exit status 1, but wherever you have those log examples, those would come out on the container and not in the middle of your function call. So I wanted to make you aware of that. And the easiest way to make use of it is just to literally swap out the old watchdog for the new one. And that's enough. So once you've swapped it in, instead of the watchdog, you're downloading the binary from this site. There's a slightly different flag that you need to set, and then it will behave in that new way. Any questions? Richard, any questions from you? Stefan? Okay. The other thing that the watchdog can do is something called HTTP mode, and Burton's been talking about that. This is where this picture comes in more useful. So right now, the current way that we use the watchdog is like this, forking mode. Every time the parent, which is the watchdog binary, gets a request, it will create a child process, set the environment variables from the HTTP headers. You'd have seen that in the workshop. And it connects 3 pipes: standard in, standard out, and standard error. In is where we put the HTTP requests. Out is where we read the response. And standard error, as you've seen in that example, is another place where we can read a response. Now, the pros of this approach are that any binary can become a function, and one of the VMware teams is really interested in using Terraform, the binary, as a function. I think that could be a great use case for managing infrastructure. However, there's some performance costs and penalties of forking the process. If you're dealing with 100 concurrent requests and your code takes 1 megabyte of memory, then you're going to use 300 megabytes of memory. The other thing is, there's sometimes, in some languages, not all, a small cost to start this child process for each request. And so what I've done is I surveyed the other projects, looked at some of the other ways of doing inter-process communication, and added something that uses a persistent connection between the parent and the child. Okay, this is called HTTP mode. And the way it works is when the watchdog starts up, it forks a single child, keeps it open the entire time, and then every request that comes in, rather than creating a new process inside that container, reuses the same one over and over again. And the result on the memory is you maybe start off with a higher penalty of around 30 megabytes, maybe 10 megabytes, but it won't increase much. So when you're handling 100 or 1,000 requests, that memory is unlikely to increase at all beyond from where you started with it. Do we have any questions on this?
This should be the default somewhere far away in the future.
Yeah, this should be the default, Stefan is saying, because if you're using one of our templates like Node, Python, or Go, it's easy for us to package it so that you never see which version of the watchdog or what mode it's in, but you just get the benefits of the fine tuning that we've done. Then if you do want to do something custom, you always have that option that we won't remove, that will keep going, of the forking mode. And when the guys want to use Terraform, they can do, and they don't have to worry about it not working. Okay, so if you want to use the forking mode, as you know, that's what we've had for the last 14, 15 months. It's very widely supported, it's very well tested. The HTTP mode is a lot newer, and it needs us to write a template for every language that we're interested in. So we already have somebody's written about 5 different Java templates. So I think that's a sign that we should look at adding Java with this method. Burton's written one that uses C#. So John Callaway, you should definitely try this out. It should give you something like a 10 to 20 times performance improvement on your Raspberry Pi, maybe a lot more, who knows. I know that Node.js is very slow to start up on a Raspberry Pi. It can take a second to start the process, and you really don't want to pay a second for every call that you get. And that's only on the Raspberry Pi. So if you started Node once, you pay that second up front, and then every request you get is going to be super fast. This picture I have made available, I'll make it available again. Now, the other thing I wanted to mention was load testing and scaling improvements. So this does come under that load testing and scaling. There's a guy from, I think, Imperial University in London has been approaching the project about load testing. And so we gave him this HTTP template for Golang and a bunch of other stuff. And we were squeezing thousands, if not tens of thousands of requests per second through it. We've also found some areas where within the architecture, we can simplify a little bit now and allow the call that comes to the function to go direct to the gateway to go directly to a function. I'll show you what that looks like. So this is a picture of the overall architecture in the project. We have the API gateway, we have a middleware, which is like your provider, Faz, Swarm, Nomad, or Kubernetes, and then we have the functions that are deployed again. Each of these has HTTP port 8080, each listens to requests. Now, we get the call from the gateway, and we put it through the provider and let that call the function for an invocation. But we don't have to, because the gateway can see the functions. And by removing this hop, we can speed things up a bit. And so that's something that we're doing as a result of this load testing work. Another thing is Kubernetes DNS service isn't great at handling a lot of traffic at the same time. There's been a very tiny tweak that we've been able to make by putting a dot at the end of a DNS entry that actually means instead of doing 5 or 6 lookups for every single call, it only does 1. And so that's an example of some of the things that we're doing. If that interests you, really would love your help testing it, maybe even getting involved with it. And something along the lines of this, again, is a bunch of issues that I've created in the main FAS repo about architecture. So these aren't things that are necessarily priority 1, but they're things that we need to think about, the things that effectively are coming onto the roadmap. So if you've not familiarized yourself with this, please do have a look at it. What I just mentioned there is listed. There are some other things as well that you're welcome to get involved with. One thing we're talking about is graceful termination in the watchdog. So this means that if you downscale a function and it's still handling some requests, we should allow it a grace period to clean up before we remove it. Otherwise, you could lose some requests. Okay. So there's plenty of work to get on with. There's loads of areas where you can help. And if you're not super confident with code or Golang, the contributing guide has a whole bunch of different ideas here, of which I'm happy to expand that list. All right. So that was all from me. And on those updates, we've got a bit more time. So I'll open the floor. We have more questions or, ask whatever you want to do. Okay, how can we start this?
I got a quick question.
Yeah.
I asked this a while ago, and I forget your response. But like a 1.0 release, sort of a this is ready to go sort of milestone. Looking through the Trello board and OpenFast issues and things, I haven't seen any mention of a like a sort of a final release, if you will, basically like a goal milestone to hit sort of thing. Any thoughts on that now that you're focused on this more?
Yeah, so my initial thought with things being 1.0 or not is there's lots of software available in the open source world which isn't 1.0 but is production ready. What 1.0 generally means is we're not going to break anything or change anything. So it's a kind of a commitment to an interface. It's a commitment to patterns and designs, rather than whether something's ready to go to production or to be deployed at scale. And I think that question is one that each team or company should ask itself as they evaluate the project and work with us. Does that answer the question?
Generally, but looking for like are there, you have milestones in mind, goals to accomplish and things like that?
I think not for 1.0. I think there's definitely milestones in the backlog. There's some big items to look at, but I think 1.0 may be too early to call because it means that you can't change anything. You have to cut a 2.0 release in order to start changing stuff. And so we're exploring some things at the moment that are fundamental, like we have the HTTP mode of the watchdog. some deep dives into performance testing, and I'm not sure that it would work in the benefit of the project to draw a line under all of that and say that's 1.0. So for now, I think unless there's a compelling reason to call it 1.0, is to continue as we are, try not to break backward compatibility, and could really do with generating more contributions on the project too.
Yeah, absolutely. I was looking for like well, not looking for, but asking if like a sort of a progress graph or something. You know what I mean? Because right now it just seems like there's issue pops up and then we fix it, work on it, fix it, and then we release 7.1, and then some other issue pops up, and you know what I mean? It's just like a constant cycle rather than sort of a goal-oriented kind of thing.
Okay.
Yeah, I think a roadmap with goals, as in major milestones, would be good. But if we set ourselves to do 1.0, I don't know, in May, I think it's a better approach.
Yeah, 1.0 is more of a just a conversation starter, I guess. But the goals and milestones and things like that, I think would be nice.
Yeah, my only issue with that is that we don't have enough contributions in terms of code. The reason that the project's running in a reactive way is because that's the contributions that we're getting from the community. They are piecemeal, small items. The only, I guess, bigger part that I can think of is the CRD that Stefan is doing. That could be under a milestone. But a lot of the other stuff that we're doing is about performance tuning and improving the developer experience. So really, it's hard to put that on there because that would just come down to the work that I do at the moment. But yeah, I hear your feedback. You're interested in seeing what are the big items that are being tackled and in what order.
Right. Yeah. I'm looking to personally, anyway, contribute more and dive into the code deeper, things like that. But at the moment, it seems something comes up and then somebody with either more time or is faster at it, jumps on it and then it gets resolved and off we go.
Yeah. I've got at least 15 items out that are on the roadmap to do with architecture in the main FAS repository. Nobody's jumped on any of them. They're all big items that need careful thought. Those are the kind of places where I could really benefit from the community stepping up and tackling it, but only if they have time. I don't want anyone to burn out. I'd rather that people fight over smaller bugs and get them shipped and tested quickly than bite off too much and then end up feeling guilty or not being able to finish it. So there are big things on there, and if you want to ask more information about them, anybody, please do. It's the reason that they're on GitHub. They're just very high level stuff. And for instance, the change that I mentioned about graceful termination, that would be a great example of something someone could pick up.
Yeah, and there are plenty examples of doing that with Go.
Yeah.
And I think it will improve a lot our system.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just looking at the Trello board now, and there's so much on here that nobody's touched or interacted with. So this is the roadmap. This is the progress of the project. And, I'm not seeing people going in here and interacting with it. So, I mean, maybe we could try and reboot this. But again, it just comes down to the availability of people on the project. It's okay if the only thing someone can do is help on GitHub or, work on it at their own company or go and do talks about it. That's fine. We need to have like realistic expectations, but when there are people that are ready to take on bigger items and run with them, they're here, and I'm willing to give support and mentoring. I'm sure if you ask Stefan nicely, he'll help you with stuff too, or John.
Great, thank you.
So I will have a look at the roadmap text file in the main repository and see. I had an action point to look at it and keep it up to date. I think it's got some stuff on there that needs adjusting, syncing up with Trello. I'll look at Trello and see if there's things there that have already been finished. And let's say one of you wants to contribute a little bit. You can't quite take on the graceful termination, but maybe you've got some ideas about it that you could input there. Maybe you don't have enough time to invoke the functions directly from the gateway, but you might want to test that and say, well, look, you know, Stefan or Richard, when you finish this work, ping me because I'd like to work with you testing it. I've got some ideas, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, we definitely need a second pair of eyes on testing, because when you work on something and you run your own tests, somehow mentally you run them so the test will end up good.
Yeah. Yeah,
That's
I had that.
Programming nature, you know.
I had that with one of the things with the latest performance enhancement. There was a scenario I hadn't tested that was quite basic. Again, if people want to spend time trying to put together automation tests, there's a big opportunity there. We have a code project, Certify Incubator it's called, and the idea is that you can take any OpenFaaS provider and certify that it does what it should do. So some of the tests that exist check that your environmental variables get picked up and that they're available when a function runs. Another one checks that any labels you set get picked up. Another one checks that it actually turns up on the list when you list them. So I don't know, maybe it's time, maybe it's just knowing what to work on, but you can't go too far wrong by asking.
For example, I had this issue today. I was working on porting the secrets to the CRD, and I noticed that we don't have some kind of function that could test the whole stack definition. Like running a function and see, are the labels there, are the environment variables there, are the secrets there, are the limits there. So that could be part of the integration test, just a function in whatever language that looks for all these, for a full stack definition. I think that will help us a lot on the long run.
Yeah.
And it's not hard to train. It's not Golang. Can be whatever other language. Doesn't matter.
Yeah, something to bubble that up. I'll paste the Certify project here in the Slack channel for later. And you know, guys, have a look at it. It's needing more work, but it does a deployment test, checks that environmental variables are set using a known Docker image like Stefan was talking about. It does some retries as well, because when you do the tests, it never works the first time because of the different latencies on a CI machine to your own machine. So there's retry mechanisms as well. Nick Jackson was doing some Twitch recordings of how he was doing his integration testing with Go. So if you need a bit of direction, that looked useful too.
Yeah.
Okay, I see somebody's written up all of the meeting notes. That's great. Thanks, Richard. I did start that, but this is really good. Is a meeting in Slack as well for the docs? Yes. Okay, so you can look at the Google Doc. It's got all of the past notes on it. It might be that you raised something a few months ago and you didn't feel like it got addressed, or it got forgotten about. It probably did get forgotten about. Just look back. If there's something that you want to talk about again, feel free to post it. There you go. All right.
Just, I guess, to kind of touch on Burton's sort of, ask about sort of roadmap and so on. Like, are we looking at things through? Are we looking at what other frameworks are doing and sort of other, open source commercial frameworks are doing to sort of make sure that we have a degree of parity, or at least, responses to everything that they have, or are we kind of still shying away from that? Or, what are your thoughts on getting into that kind of, rat race potentially?
So what are the features like compared to other open source frameworks? They are, I would say, on parity, on a level with a lot of the projects that are out there already. There are some key differences to OpenFAS, like the fact that we're using Docker images for the builds. So the HTTP mode that I just talked about is very similar to something that I started a few months ago for the same reason, called Afterburn, that I'm deprecating in favor of this. One of the things that validated the decision is the fact that all of those projects use that, and they only ever used that. They never did anything different. And so, yeah, there's an example of it. Another example is how deep we're going on the integration with Kubernetes, with the CRD. The CRD is a piece of code that lives in Kubernetes and looks at the different events in the cluster and tries to create your functions based upon Kubernetes objects. So the Kubernetes projects that only target Kubernetes and don't do Swarm or Nomad, they've been doing that from the start, or if they haven't been, then they've started doing it. And so, yeah, there's another great example of it. And, there's areas where we're not following or catching up, we're just leading, and the function store would be one of them. So it's good to see John Callaway's got an interest in getting some unique functions to place in there for ARM. If there's something that you've seen, you've got some features you think would be cool, again, feel free to propose it or to mention it.
The main thing that's kind of jumped out, and do excuse me if this is already on the Trello, or it probably is on the Trello, but sort of some sort of the function composition and chaining, and sort of wrapping that up, within either the YAML or even if you, because it starts letting you do things like, as an extension of the function store, you can start registering, metadata around inputs and outputs and start visually composing stuff. It's a bit sort of, it's a bit of kind of almost like marketing sugar, but it kind of really sort of, it looks very nice, and the underlying sort of ability to kind of have the chaining built in, I think, is increasingly useful, because hitting a function on its own is not, it's the combination and the composition that the real power, I think, personally, comes in.
Yeah, so functions can be chained quite easily. We mentioned this in the workshop. There's a good guide on how it works. As for a visual tool, I'm not sure that's going to be number one on the priority, but I think it has been suggested in the past. There may be a GitHub issue about it. In terms of chaining, one thing that we can do to make it easier is to create a client library in some of the popular languages like Python, so that syntactically people can write code that isn't about post here, get there. It's got a cleaner API. Again, this is a community project. There's a ton of people in the community. You're all welcome to do that or to suggest it. From my perspective, I'm trying to lead the project along a path where it's stable, production ready. It has things there that people expect, like the secret support, like the CRD. So that's not something that I'm as interested in doing on my own. But if people do want to make a proposal, put some designs together, we'll certainly look at it.
Also, regarding this to be on the same level with other projects, there is a CNCF working group on what function as a service should cover. And I think once that document is ready and we have a clear path to what FAS means, we should cover most of the requirements there. We certainly do cover most of them, but there are some special integration like event streaming from whatever MQ out there, Kafka, whatever. So to have a generic interface for events, I think once that spec is out, everybody that has a FAS project and it's somehow successful will try to implement that.
Yeah.
So I think our focus, if we look at all the other projects, should not be like copying something from another project, but try to be on the same path with the FAS spec that CNCF is trying to put together. I think that's pretty important.
That'll be perfect.
Yeah, I mentioned event streaming. I think I mentioned it when we started the meeting, and we'll close it now because we're just coming up to the hour. And there'll be a pattern whereby a function could have a label and say what event it cares about. Small piece of code can be written to connect into something. Maybe it's Python, maybe it's RabbitMQ, maybe it's Kafka, maybe it's Amazon's simple notification system. You'd write a small piece of code that will just be able to accept the event from the source. Whatever we have in common, we'll be able to find out what functions care about it and forward the message. There's something called cloud events that the CNCF serverless working group are proposing. It's not ready, it's changing a lot, but it is starting to bring up some of the ideas and look at some of the limitations of having a generic approach to events. The main problem with that is A, nobody's using it, and B, nobody's producing events in that format. So Google aren't doing it, Azure aren't doing it. And there's a slight chicken and egg problem. But if we think about writing some code to connect with those main event sources, what you find is that we can start delivering that value and perhaps adapt or change some formats later on if people have a specific format for this cloud event.
Yeah, and that is tied to everything that FAS meant to be, right? To be reactive and to easily chain. If you have that cover that input stream, you can do chaining afterwards. So I think it's on the same discussion that John mentioned. Chaining and events are the building blocks of a successful FAS project in the future. Yeah,
that's right. So my call to you, all of you and the people that watch the recording later on, is to get involved and to find out to what level you want to be involved. Do you want to be the people that form this roadmap and deliver on it? Or are you happier to kind of be around the outside and help us fix issues and be reactive? Both are fine. But we are in need of people that can contribute larger parts of code and features to the project as well. Okay. Great. Well, I'll close the line now since we've gone over a little bit, but some good questions there. I'll go reflect on this as well. Feel free to post stuff in Slack about anything you think of afterwards.
Great. Bye.
All
See
right.
you.
Bye. Cheers.
Thanks, Alex. Bye.
Thanks, Alex.